Okay, we'll give it another minute or two to see if other people sign on. And then we will go from there. Yeah, Elijah, go ahead.
I had trouble getting access with the ebook. Like I bought it and everything, but when I tried to go and activate it and like click on it, it wouldn't allow me to. Like I called the people that work at the bookstore and stuff, so they told me to just bring my computer down after class. But I just thought I would let you know that.
Cool. Yeah, you all do have till Monday till those first assignments because stuff like this happens. Yeah, and if for some reason they can't help you with it, McGraw Hill does have like their own helpline you can call, and they might be able to help you more.
All right, thank you. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah, a couple years ago when I taught this, gosh, it would have been more than a couple now, like 8 years ago or so, it was when Sandy hit New York and their offices are in New York, so it didn't work for anybody. So yeah, tech issues are always fun. All right, well, we will go ahead and get started. We are going to start with our very first Explain It to the Media quiz today. So even if you were not able to do the reading, if you know anything about psychology, a lot of this you'll be able to explain. And remember, you have 1,200 points for the whole semester, and this is only 10. So it might take you a little bit to get used to my type of questions, and that's fine. So I'm going to share my screen so you can see where these are. So let me get the proper thing. Here we go. Okay, so when you're in Blackboard, so go ahead and log into Blackboard and go to our class page. I've added a couple things. So there is a section for recordings of class. So if you have to miss a day, it will be there. And then if you click into exams quizzes, you will see today's quiz. So you just go ahead and click on it, and there are 5 questions. Answer them with, you know, whatever format. If you want to do bullets, sentences, whatever, as long as you're giving me the information. It is, let me see, 1:02 now. We'll try going till 1:12, and then I will see if people still need more time, since this is the first time I'm doing it online. So if you're having any problems accessing it, go ahead and type in the chat. But if you go to our Blackboard page, exams and quizzes, it should pop right up and it should be the only one visible to you. And I'm gonna go ahead and mute so you don't have to listen to my fan while you take it.
Taking it right now, correct? I couldn't hear that.
Yes, I'm muted. Yep, go ahead and do it now.
Which time is it again?
Say that again, Lara.
I'm confused.
Yeah, it's not really working for me. Like I tried changing my password and everything. It's just I've been trying to do this for a couple days too. I don't really know what's going on. So
Yeah, Elijah, I'll put in the chat who you should contact about that, but go ahead and just use the Word file that I sent, and you can just email it to me when you're done with it instead of submitting it through Blackboard. And anyone else who's having sign-in problems, go ahead and do that. So if you look in the chat, there's a file there.
thank you.
No problem.
Well,
How many points is this quiz worth?
This is worth 10.
All right. Are there any wrong answers here, or?
As long as you have the factual information correct, you're good.
All right, so you want examples, or?
So what you're doing on this is you're just pretending a reporter is asking you this question and you're answering. And if you guys have any more questions, write them in the chat. And then if everybody could mute, that would be great. So let's do it this way. Once you get it finished, go ahead and put the raised hand icon up just so I can see how people are doing. And if you're still working, keep working.
Hold on.
So next there is a document that I put a link to Google Drive for. People who are finishing up your quizzes, go ahead and finish it up. Everyone can lower your hand, and if you don't figure out how to do that, I can clear it all. But go ahead and look at this Google Drive doc real quick and just answer true or false. There are no points here. This one is just sort of a general knowledge. I'll give you just a couple minutes to do that, and then we'll chat about it, and then we'll start our first lecture. All right, so take about another minute to look over the true false, and if you're not there, that's okay. Again, this is just sort of general knowledge. You're not turning this in. And then if anyone got kicked out of the quiz in Blackboard, I adjusted the settings, so you should be able to go in and finish it. Apologies. We all have a learning curve for all the tech here, and the next time we give one of these, I will make it so much easier. So we will keep working from there. Okay, so even if you haven't finished, that's fine. One thing that might surprise everybody about this sheet, the knowledge of psychology test, is that all the answers are false. So this often startles people. Part of it, some of them are tricky. I didn't make this. As you can see, there's an attribution at the bottom. Part of it, they purposely made the wording tricky, so it's false. But some of them are things that we assume are correct, but are not. So for example, number 8, fortunately for babies, human beings have a strong maternal instinct. The behaviorist John Watson did some research on this, and you have to be trained to be a parent, just like any other thing that you learn how to do. You know, another example, number 14, genius being akin to insanity, not so much. There are people who are geniuses who are not insane. There are people who are geniuses who are insane. There are people who are not the sharpest tool in the box who are insane. So this is, again, just to sort of show you that there's a lot of false ideas about psych out there in our sort of vernacular. So just to give you those ideas. A little bit of myth busting that we'll do throughout the semester. So now what I'm going to do is get my PowerPoint up and going for you all. And then we will start going through it. And please feel free to either use the chat or raise your hand if you have questions during the PowerPoint. I will have it so that I can see you. So if you see me kind of looking over here, you all are going to be on my second monitor, which is here. So that's why. I'm not just staring blindly into space, I promise. So get this up and going here. Alrighty. And I'll go ahead and share screen. Okay, and let me get my chat up here so I can see if anyone has questions, and also my participants window. Great. Drag that down so I can see more than just 3 people. Look at that. Okie dokie. So I put myself a music stand so that I have some semblance of a podium because I just lecture better when I'm not sitting. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to turn my fan off here so it doesn't throw my papers everywhere. And I'm going to start talking about psych. So we're going to do an overview of what psychology is, the history of psychology, and what the different areas of study in psychology are. I am teaching our new capstone course in psychology this semester, which is called Ethics and Professional Issues. And I just met with them right before you, and they really wanted me to make sure I emphasized different career possibilities to you all. So I will make sure that I do that. Again, handout 1.1 that you looked at, they're actually ordered from the highest to the lowest with respect to their error rate. So the stuff at the top is the stuff that more people are convinced is true, which is sort of interesting. So we're going to talk today about what is psychology. And as you all probably figured out when we were working on your polls that you filled out, right? Psychology can be a lot of different things to a lot of different people. I'm just getting my little clicker paired here. Okay, so just real quick to give you some context, this is our textbook, and you might have a variation of how that looks. And then this is your textbook author, Laura King. I think it's pretty important. Something I'm really trying to do in most of my classes this semester is to show who these people are that we're looking at, because a lot of times they aren't necessarily that diverse. So obviously Laura King identifies as female, but is also what? Right, so that's something that we should look at. I also found out today, which I never knew until today, that she and I actually graduated from the same undergrad institution. So there you go, random connection. All right. So psychology, these are your definitions that, but then this is obviously just a sampling of them, but I tried to get a representation of the different things different people said. So people said the study of the human brain and its functions, the study of the mind and how it functions, the science of mind and behavior of people, how humans react to everything, why people do what they do. And the one underneath it is kind of similar, the learning of why people do the things they do and the effects it has on the world. I thought, I'm not sure, is actually a really good response, right? You're taking intro psych, so you can learn about it. So, and admitting what you don't know is actually something that's really important that a lot of people are not great at. And then I liked the best major ever, but of course I'm super biased. So there you go. So this is what we tend to think of when we think about psychology, that it's about studying, diagnosing, and treating abnormal, distressing, or impairing behavior. But that's actually only a teeny tiny part of what psychology does. So psychology is a lot about a whole bunch of different things. So it's about how we perceive information. So if you look at this, and I don't know how this will translate on a Zoom share, but if you stare at this for a while, it will start to look like the circles are moving. And that is actually, yes. Oh, Kristen, I just saw your question. The PowerPoints are already available on Blackboard, both as PDFs and as the PowerPoints themselves. So feel free to follow along there. So, although these will translate a lot better on the screen, obviously. But yeah, so this is all about perception, about how we are looking at this. This doesn't actually move. This is a static picture, but our brain tells us it does because of the way that these things are combined. So it's how we perceive information. Another thing here, try to count the black dots. They will seem to be jumping around. Some of you may have seen this before. There are actually no black dots on the screen here. This is again another sort of optical illusion that our brain, because of the way it's constructed, tricks us into thinking that things are moving around when they're not. Psychology is also about how we interpret information. So you see your friend pass you in the hall. She doesn't look at you or say anything to you. Why? Right? So what are some of the reasons you might think your friend might not say anything to you? And go ahead and type these in the chat. What might you think if you saw, very close friend walks right by and you're like, what gives? Yeah, she's mad. She didn't see me. Yeah, maybe that one makes you feel a little better. Hungry. Yeah, right. If the person is hungry, that could do it. Maybe they're upset with you. So yeah, or it could be like we were saying, in a hurry, something's wrong with her. She's sad, a personal issue, zoning out, thinking about something. Maybe you smell that, Elijah. This is hilarious. She's got things on her mind. Listening to her headphones and not paying attention, not wanting to talk. Maybe she's late for class or upset. Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways you could interpret that one piece of information, right? And there are ways that would make you personally feel better or worse, right? So if you think like she's mad, she's upset with me, right? You're gonna be pretty defensive or maybe even sad or mad yourself, right? But if you think, oh, she just didn't see me, she's rushing to class, with her mask on, maybe she's having some vision problems. Mine kind of creeps up into my eyes sometimes, right? Then you're less likely to think that, right? Then you tend to think, oh, well, she's just having a bad day and she'll get over it. Okay. There we go. Psychology is also about how we remember things. So I am going to show you a series of words for 10 seconds, and then we will go on to the next slide. Okay, so now write down all the words you can remember. Alrighty. And now let's use the raise hand feature here again. Did anyone write down the word needle? So if you did, go ahead and raise your hand. Yeah, looks like a few people did here. Yep, and this is really common. Needle actually wasn't on the list, but everything else was related to needle, right? In one study, 42% of participants recalled the word needle because it's sort of almost like suggested in the other words. So our memories are not as perfect as we like to think they are. So psychology is also about how we learn things. So why do kids throw temper tantrums? So again, here's another thing you can throw in the chat. Why do you think kids throw temper tantrums? They don't get what they want. They're looking for attention. Yeah, sometimes they just can't explain what they want. They're having a lot of emotions. Elijah, yeah, it results in getting what you want. Kids don't know how to express themselves, says Carter. They're told no when they're set on an idea. And they can't explain what's wrong, right? So yeah, let me go back here. Often, as you all are pointing out, they realize that if they throw a tantrum, it ends up getting what they want. So maybe they try just asking for something and their parents just say no, right? So then they try like getting a little more insistent and their parents just say no. And so then finally they're like, okay, fine, I'm gonna throw a tantrum to get what I want. And again, several of you said they can't explain or express what they really want, but they learned that if I cry like this, I get what I want. So we're unintentionally reinforcing or rewarding the temper tantrum when we give in. This is something we're working on personally right now because it's really hard to have a 2-year-old and when they're crying, you just want to make them feel better. But you obviously also don't want to turn your kid into someone who's spoiled. So we're trying to find a happy medium right now. So what else is psychology? It's about how we solve or how we learn things. So which glass has more water in it? B in picture 1 or C in picture 2? Well, I could hope that most of you can look at this and say, it's the same amount, right? Because you see that B has just been poured into C. But this is something we have to actually learn. And young kiddos actually will say C has more, even if they watch someone pour from B into C, because it's taller. So you have to learn that as you go through. And this is actually one of Piaget's stages that we'll learn at the end of the semester when we talk about development. So psychology is also about how we solve problems. So we think of problem solving as a higher order function that really only humans can do. But Kohler showed us that chimps could problem solve. And that's what these pictures are you see in the background. So this is a chimp who they hung bananas from the ceiling and the chimp had these boxes available to it and it had to figure out, how do I get up to the bananas? And so through some trial and error, it was actually able to solve that. However, one thing that people are often shocked by, and I'm gonna have to hang on just a second, do a different share in order for you all to see this. So let me do that. Pause the little video here. Okay, so here is a pigeon. So we can see that, again, a pigeon, we don't necessarily think of pigeons as bright, right? Some people refer them as flying rats. Some people have literally talked to we use the phrase bird brain. So that's something that we see as well. And it took it a while. Like, let's be honest. It had to kind of like really puzzle through the problem, but it can do it. So, that's, again, sort of calling into question our ideas that only we or maybe the apes have higher order thinking. So one of the things we'll talk about later in the semester is animal intelligence. And for example, there's a species of crow that is actually one of the really higher order thinkers. And again, sort of surprises us in comparison to them. I think that's a really good question, Lara. I think its wings were clipped, so it couldn't fly. So what else is psychology? So it's about why people do things. So why is achievement very important for some people and other people just don't care? Why do people choose different professions? Why do some people do dangerous and impulsive things like drinking and driving that the rest of us really avoid? So psychology can help us to answer these questions. So in summary, psychology is the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. So it is a science, that's why your textbook is called The Science of Psychology. And the goals of psychology are to describe and explain behavior, also try to predict future behavior. So I was talking about this in my Theories of Personality course this morning. We want to be able to predict things like if someone's going to be violent, right? Or if someone's going to try to harm themselves, so that we can try to prevent that. And then use those findings in practical ways, so apply them. And again, people tend to think only of clinical psychology, but in fact, you can apply these in a whole bunch of different ways. So sports psychology, for example, is one of the ways you can apply these. Or thinking about industrial organizational psychology. So working in a business setting, how can you make people more effective, more efficient when they're working? Things along those lines. So behavior is any action that an organism does. So we tend to think, again, mostly just of humans, but psychology also looks at animals, as we saw with the pigeon. So behavior is any action that an organism does. Any action we can observe and record. So that might include yelling, smiling, blinking, talking, anything along those lines. Pecking a box around in the case of the last video. Mental processes are the internal. Oh, go ahead and mute yourself. Oh, you know, I think this might be my screen. Hang on a sec. I think YouTube just decided to show another video, so I apologize. All right, that's done. Forgot about the auto feature. All of the technology problems. Woohoo! We'll get it, guys. We'll get it. Get back up the correct slide here. All righty. And then I can share with y'all again. Ta-da! Okay. So, mental processes are internal subjective experiences that we have. And obviously, like, we can explain ours, but to figure out other people's mental processes, we have to infer them from their behavior. So they're internal subjective experiences. And they include things like sensations, perceptions, dreams, thoughts, beliefs, feelings, all these things that we can only sort of explain to another person. At least we don't have the technology yet to really like see inside someone's mind what they're thinking, right? Which might be a good thing. We don't want to get too creepy to Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. And then you do this through scientific study. So this is a way of asking and answering questions and evaluating competing ideas with careful observation and rigorous analysis. So we're going to talk a lot more about that starting in next week when we talk about research methods. Alrighty, so now we're going to start talking about how psychology developed. So psychology is actually a young discipline, relatively speaking. So psychology as its own academic department subject started in 1879. Most academic subjects started way before that. So we're pretty young, you know, we're not that far over 100 years old, right? So although psychology didn't exist prior to that as its own field, many early thinkers wondered how the mind works. So for example, in India, Buddha pondered how sensations and perceptions combined to form ideas, and that was 500 BCE. In Israel, Hebrew scholars tried to figure out how to link thoughts and emotions to the body, and they thought that we thought with our hearts and felt with our intestines. So there you go. One of the things that research does is help us sort those things out like that. So essentially, psychology is the combination of biology and philosophy. So we had physiologists and philosophers both trying to figure out the same questions, and psychology said, what if we sort of combined these things and did it that way? So here are some of those great thinkers before psychology was actually its own thing. So Socrates, he was 469 to 399 BCE. So Socrates and his student Plato concluded that the mind is separate from the body, and they thought it continued after the body died. So some sort of spirit continuing on. They also thought knowledge was innate. You were just born with the knowledge you were going to have. Aristotle, again, Plato's student, said that the soul and body are not separable, and he thought knowledge was not innate. He sort of diverged from Socrates after a while. He said it grows from experiences that are stored in your memory. And much of psychology really looks at this. So this is the field that we would now call cognitive psychology today. Within our department, Dr. Ariel is our cognitive psychologist, and he studies memory and learning. Then there was a period of 2,000 years where people just weren't thinking about these things in the same way. And the next person who really was digging and writing about these things was René Descartes. So he was in 1595 to 1650, and he also thought the mind was distinct from the body. He dissected animals and concluded that the fluid in the brain contains animal spirits that flow through the nerves and muscles and cause movement. We would call these action potentials today. We'll talk about those when we talk about the brain in a few weeks. But he thought this was his animal spirit. So yes, this is the same Descartes that did a lot for geometry and said, I think, therefore I am. But even if we go before those thinkers, we know that people were thinking about madness and psychological constructs well before documented history and well before these philosophers and sort of concurrent with them. So in ancient times, abnormal behavior was seen as the work of evil spirits. So demons and ghosts were thought to cause abnormal behavior. And when a person acted oddly, he or she was expected to be possessed by those evil spirits. So they tried to then rid the person of those evil spirits. And there were a couple of ways they could do that. One was called trephination, and this is the picture of the skull you see here. So they would actually drill holes in your skull to let the spirit out. This was before anesthesia. This was before proper cleansing processes. So you can imagine how great this was, right? And they were using, Stone Age or Bronze Age tools to do this. So it might not have been that precise, but this is a way they thought would do it. And this could be combined with or separate from an exorcism. And yes, this is the type of exorcism you think of from horror movies. Yeah, I see a couple people saying, ouch. Yes, that had to be awful, right? Yeah, and exorcisms were honestly probably psychologically awful for the person involved. So a shaman or priest would recite prayers, perform magic, have the person drink potions, etc., to try to rid the person of evil spirits. Ancient Egypt had the first known psychiatric text. It described something called hysteria. We use this term, oh, you're just so hysterical today. But this was from the same root, hyster, that the word uterus comes from. And only women were thought to develop hysteria in Egypt, and it was believed to be the result of a wandering uterus. So your uterus would just get up and walk around your body. And if your arm was numb and they couldn't explain why, it's because your uterus was hanging out in your shoulder. Obviously not accurate, but we believed this for quite some time. So it would interfere with other organs, causing various symptoms such as pain, sadness, and distress. Ancient China also looked into these things, and they saw the human body as having both a positive and negative force, so a yin and a yang. This is the popular yin-yang symbol that, when I was growing up in the 90s, everybody had the necklaces and the t-shirts and whatnot. But the idea is that if they're out of balance, then abnormal behavior will result. And a typical way of healing them was to try to starve them to deplete them of their excess force, so whichever one was out of balance. So, and then in the Greek and Roman cultures, they took this idea and sort of expanded upon it. And so they had names for mental disorders, but then they also had an idea very similar to the yin and the yang that talked about the 4 humors. So I'll talk about the humors and then we'll go back to the names of the mental disorders. So the idea here was that just like yin and yang, if one of these was in excess, it would cause problems. It could result in physical disease or mental disease. And they were blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If someone had too much blood, it was said to cause moodiness. If someone had too much phlegm, it would cause fatigue. If someone had too much yellow bile, it would cause depression or sadness. If someone had too much black bile, it would lead to aggression and anxiety. And the way that they treated these was very similar to the way that they treated the yin and the yang. They might try to starve someone. Bleeding used to be a thing where they just cut you and let some blood drain out. Or they'd use leeches to try to bring your blood back into balance. So again, they thought they were doing things that were helpful, right? But might have been more harmful. And so some of the names for the mental disorders kind of carry over into our modern day language. So melancholia. Yeah, it does sound like a nightmare. I mean, they would do this if you had a fever too. They'd bleed you. It's just not just a great way to treat things, but they thought they were helping at the time. So melancholia is an unshakable sadness, mania, euphoria and frenzied activity, dementia, general intellectual decline, hysteria, the presence of a physical ailment with no apparent physical cause. Delusions were blatantly false beliefs, and hallucinations, imagined sights and sounds. And so again, we use a lot of these terms in the same way today. So Hippocrates, you probably heard of the Hippocratic Oath. This is the same Hippocrates. He is considered the father of modern medicine. and he and his associates left a body of work called the Hippocratic Corpus, in which they suggested that psychological disorders could and should be treated just like physical disorders. And they came up with the ideas that these could be caused by brain pathology, head trauma, or even genetics. You know, they didn't call it genetics by the time, but they would say, like, it's passed down through the family, essentially. So they were ahead of their time, to be perfectly honest, thinking of things in that way. They considered brain to be the brain to be the seat of wisdom, consciousness, intelligence, and emotion. And so they said, if you have one of those things that's kind of off, then that would be, you know, because something's going wrong in your brain. Now, this was revolutionary at the time because prior to this, people didn't understand what the brain did. So when Egyptians mummified people, they would actually just pull the brain out through the nose and discard it. They would preserve other organs, but they just got rid of the brain. So it was kind of revolutionary to realize the brain mattered. Then in the Middle Ages or medieval times, there was a growing distrust of science, which led to a resurgence of ideas from ancient times that abnormality was caused by evil spirits, but here it was personified by Satan, the devil. And during the Middle Ages, there was on average one church for every 200 people. So religion became a very large part of your daily life. And again, something was going on, it was Satan. There were also incidences of mass madness, including tarantism, where people would dance, jump, convulse, and this ended up turning into the word tarantella, which is a type of dance today. They would shout, dance, rave, and jump in patterns, and that word rave is the same word that we use today for a rave, right? This is going to sound really crazy, but there was also what was called like lycanthropy. This is actually what this is a picture of on the slide, where people believed they were wolves or acted like wolves. And then witches. Madness was sometimes viewed as witchcraft, and so people who were doing things differently than other folks might be punished or even executed. And all this seems really odd now, like, why would people do tarantellas or pretend they were werewolves? But in 1992, 21 people at a school had to be rushed to the hospital after developing dizziness, headache, nausea, and stomach pain after one girl said she smelled something odd coming from a vent. There was no physical cause, no physical problems with the patients. They were sent home and quickly recovered. So, again, this idea that we can like buy into something and believe it is a big piece of things. If you want to hear a really cool story about a witch, you can Google Grace Sherwood. She was the Witch of Pungo. Witch Duck Road is named after her. And she was actually tried by ducking and found to be a witch, and then was forgiven centuries later by the governor of Virginia. So how did psychology develop out of all of this craziness? So as I mentioned, 1879 is really marked as the first time psychology was its own discipline. And so Wilhelm Wundt is considered the father of psychology. And he was at the University of Leipzig in Germany, and he campaigned to make psychology an independent discipline and established the first laboratory for the study of psychology in 1879. He brought the scientific methods of physiology to bear on philosophical questions. So for example, one study he did, he wanted to study the atoms of the mind, is how he phrased it. And therefore he measured the time from a ball hitting a platform until a participant pressed a key, a button. In this case, it was a telegraph key. They were asked to press the key as soon as they heard the ball. And basically they pressed the key faster than they were aware they heard the sound. So he was kind of looking at processing speed, essentially. And so psychology was born in this idea that we could study things, the questions about the mind empirically. So then there was this battle of the schools. In psychology's in its infancy, people have different ideas about how to look at things, explain things, and the big one is structuralism versus functionalism. So structuralism was really centered around Edward Titchener, and they believed that psychology should be about analyzing consciousness into its basic elements. Essentially, just like chemistry and physics could be seen as analyzing chemicals into their basic elements or particles into their basic elements. So again, to do this, Titchener and his friends relied on introspection, which is a process by which a person makes careful, systematic self-observations, essentially, about their own conscious experience. So they would essentially have people kind of sit around and think about how they were thinking. This is what we now would call metacognition. And there are problems with introspection, as you can imagine. You have to be pretty smart to be able to do it, to understand how Titchener explained it to people. You have to be pretty verbal to be able to articulate it, right? And it's not very reliable because everyone's experiences are very slightly different. So this, was problematic. That doesn't mean functionalism was necessarily better. So functionalism was founded by William James, and William James is considered the father of American psychology. And so he wanted to investigate the function of consciousness. So Titchener wanted to look at what are the structures, the particles that consciousness breaks down into. William James wanted to look at what is the function of consciousness. They thought that structuralists were just missing the point. They said psychology should be about investigating what is the purpose of consciousness rather than its structure. So this led to investigating mental testing, developmental patterns, sex differences. He was very influenced by Darwin. He believed that thinking was adaptive, and it allows us to consider our past, adjust to our present circumstances, and plan our future. So he was really about adaptation of thought. All right, so next up, we are going to start talking about Freud. So Freud was actually an Austrian physician. So he had an MD, he was a doctor, he was actually a specialist in neurology. And he founded the psychoanalytic school of thought. Essentially, his work with people with psychological problems led him to believe that people are influenced by unconscious forces or processes. Thoughts, memories, desires that we're just not aware of. They're outside of our conscious awareness. A lot of people take this and kind of twist it and call it subconscious, but Freud never called anything subconscious. He said it was completely unconscious, completely outside of our awareness. And he believed that these unconscious things were really related to sexual urges, and that those played a central role in behavior. This was scandalous at the time. He was in Victorian Austria, so this is the time when women didn't show their ankles, right? And he's talking about sex. If we're influenced by forces we're not aware of, can we be masters of our own minds? This was a time when a lot of people were thinking about free will. So they didn't like it because of that. Second, in an area of sexual repression, emphasis on sexuality was quite upsetting to many people. And in fact, pretty much everyone who was a student of Freud broke with him on this. And it was just like, the sex thing, not really, Sigmund, not so much. But Freud just kept believing it. The controversial nature of Freud's idea caused great resistance in the field of psychology, and his ideas were not well received among academic circles. And to be perfectly honest, they're not today in psychology beyond people who identify as psychoanalysts. And the big reason for that is that a lot of these can't be empirically tested. and in psychology, we're all about basing everything in science. Despite, or maybe even because of the controversy, right? There's this whole idea that like no press is bad press, right? Freud's ideas moved into the mainstream, influencing thought in psychology, medicine, art, and literature. And in particular, if you take English classes here at VWU, they will give you a very different perspective on Freud than you will hear in the psychology department. They use his theories quite a bit. So it's really sort of interesting to see where these things have gone. Here is my take on Freud that I will tell you about. I have always thought and admired Freud because he tried to explain everything. He tried to explain personality, human development, abnormality, how we think, right? The whole person. And a few years back, we actually took students on a trip to London, Paris, and Amsterdam to study the history of psychology there. And when I was in his office in London, because he spent the last years of his life in London because he had to flee the Nazis because his family was Jewish, I was sort of in awe because this is the birthplace of talk therapy. And if Freud had never done this, we don't know when that would have come about and how things would have formed. So it really is something to be admired, even though his exact way of doing this isn't necessarily something I would endorse. He was trained in hypnosis, and he found that it worked, but only sometimes. And in fact, what seemed to work the best was just the catharsis of talking. He moved on to just talking to people, and it was called the talking cure or talk therapy. And people would tell him things about their dreams, about their thoughts, about their experiences, and he would provide them with an interpretation of their problems. And again, the main problem with this theory is it's just not testable, and in fact, some modern psychoanalysts just argue there should be no reason to test it. All right, so now we'll start talking about behaviorism. And so I mentioned John Watson earlier when we were looking over our truths and falses. And so he was another American psychologist, and he was the founder of behaviorism, or the behaviorist school of thought. The basic tenet of his principles was only observable behavior should be studied in scientific psychology. And so behavior, according to Watson, were things that were observable or overt responses or activities. So things you could see with the naked eye. Sure, I will repeat, definitely. So his basic tenet was that only observable behavior should be studied in scientific psychology. So we shouldn't care about thoughts. We shouldn't care about feelings, only things we can observe. So behavior are just these things we can observe, we can witness, we can document. There were other people who believed this as well. So we'll talk about Skinner. We'll probably get to Skinner on Monday. I think we'll finish with Watson here today. But Skinner was another one. B.F. Skinner believed that the mind was a black box, and we shouldn't care what was happening in there at all, basically. So Watson's ideas really radically changed the landscape of psychology. So psychology really became more the scientific study of behavior. Whereas if we think back to the functionalists and the structuralists, right, they were trying to get at the building blocks or the function of consciousness. And Watson was like, nah, we don't need to worry about that. Let's look at what people and animals do and see what happens as a result of that. This was a radical reorientation of psychology as a science of observable behavior, and the study of consciousness was sort of abandoned at that time. Now, back in modern era now, we sort of study all different ways of looking at things, and certainly consciousness is back into the ways that we study things. But for a good part of the 1900s, people really were either following Freud and doing psychoanalysis or following Watson and Skinner and only looking at observable behavior. So Watson was really big in the nature-nurture debate. He proposed a fundamental change in the focus of psychology, but took a strong stand on one of the oldest questions in psychology or biology. Are we who we are because of innate things, nature that just came with our birth? Or are we the way we are because of how we are nurtured, how we are raised, what we learn throughout our lifetimes? So Watson argued strongly for nurture. He said, basically, strong environments, that's really what is focusing and influencing things. It is what you learn throughout your life. It is what's imparted to you. And this quote that I'm going to read to you, and that's on the screen, oversimplifies his stance, to be perfectly honest. But he did think that the environment was so important that there was some truth to this. So he said, give me a dozen healthy infants, well-formed, and in my own special world to bring them up in, and I guarantee to take anyone at random and train him to be any type of specialist I might select. Doctor, lawyer, artist, merchant chief, and yes, even beggarman and thief. So he thought all of these things were learned, that you don't just become a thief because you were born into poverty. You become a thief because you might see other people in your life thieving, or maybe they've even like taught you how to do these things. So they really emphasized nurture. They really said, this is why people do what they do. This is why we have to look at these things. So I am going to stop there for today, and wanted to see if anyone had any questions. You could type them in the chat, or you can raise your hand before we end for today. So your first, yes, Elijah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm asking a lot of questions. But can we find these PowerPoints somewhere, like in case I missed?
So these are all on Blackboard. I think it's, the section is called Lecture Notes. And you can find them either as a PowerPoint or as a PDF. All right, next up, looks like Julia has her hand up.
So for Connect, did you send out a link for us to register, or how would that work?
No, so the best way to do it is actually to go through Blackboard, and actually I will just go ahead and share our Blackboard page real quick, because that might be the easiest way to show you all. Here we go. All right, so if you're in the Blackboard page and you go to Connect Assignments and Quizzes, just click on any one of these assignments and it'll ask you to register. And if you register that way, it will automatically link your account on Connect to your account on Blackboard. So all of your grades will automatically come over to Blackboard. So that's the best way to do it. Yeah, I used to, and then they told us like, it's actually better to do it this way. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And then here under lecture notes are where those PowerPoints are. And again, here are the first 3 book chapters if your book hasn't arrived yet. So here is the PDF and the PowerPoint version. The only thing that's slightly different is the first couple slides, because I added what you all said about psychology and the picture of Laura King. But everything else should be identical to the PowerPoint I was using today. Looks like somebody had something in the chat, so let me pop that open. The quizzes for each Zoom meeting are based on your reading. So you should read the chapter beforehand, and typically the first day we cover material, the Connect Learn Smart module will be due for that chapter as well, which really gets the chapter info into your head. Yes, I would highly recommend getting your book all set up as soon as you can, because you do have your first Learn Smart module due on Monday. So let me get the syllabus open here for you all so you can see. And I think it's the wrong day on the syllabus, but that's due Monday, as are your first Connect assignments. And again, these Connect assignments should only take you 5 to 10 minutes each, and they're fun ways to look at the material. So, okay, Kaden, here is my thought about buying the program on the website or through the bookstore. So it's probably quicker to buy it through the website, to be perfectly honest. But if you're thinking you're gonna take 102 in the spring, buy it through the bookstore, because our code through the bookstore is good for a whole year. Whereas if you buy it through the website, it's only good for essentially this semester. So that would be my advice. But if you're thinking, I'm just going to take 101, it's quickest to just buy it through the website. Yeah, Elijah, definitely contact McGraw-Hill, and I would recommend that for all of you if you have any problems with Connect. I will find their support number and email and whatnot, and I'll send that to you all in an announcement via Blackboard so that you can use it. Like I said on Monday, unfortunately, they don't give me access to be able to actually help you from the back end. All I'm allowed to do is set stuff up. Yes, so the homework, if you look on the syllabus here that I have pulled up on screen, it is the first Learn Smart module on Connect, and then the first 4 Connect assignments. So I'll go back over here, and if you go on Blackboard under Connect assignments and quizzes, you go under chapter 1, it's everything in this folder. And again, typically these will be broken up, but I wanted to give you this week to get your book and your code all together. So the Learn Smart modules do take a little bit longer, heads up. These do take an hour or sometimes more, depending. But all of these little assignments should take you 5 to 10 minutes max. You basically watch a video, do an interactivity, read an article, and then answer some multiple choice questions about it. Alrighty, well, we are at the end of class time, so I will let you all go. Please shoot me an email if you have any questions, and have a good weekend because I won't see you until Monday.